is Spencer TINKHAM. I'm an artist who sculpts mostly reclaimed material, and I work primarily in wood, although sometimes I use metals. I paint my sculptures in oils, and my project is called Darkest Before Dawn, Brown Pelican 22-1039. The word dawn is a bit of wordplay with the popular blue dish soap brand, and I will explain the jumble of numbers behind the brown pelican later in my presentation. I'm from Norfolk, Virginia, which is on the Chesapeake Bay. It is the largest estuary in the United States, and it is the third largest estuary in the world. It's also the 10th largest shipping port in the United States, and it is home to the largest naval base in the world. So like many, I grew up witnessing a clash between nature and industry. And where I'm from, this clash is heightened in times of coastal flooding and hurricanes. Unfortunately, wildlife is often caught in the crosshairs. In times of despair, wildlife rehabilitation centers give me tremendous hope. During the 2000 treasure oil spill in Cape Town, South Africa, researchers cleaned 20,000 African penguins, eventually releasing 90% of them. The penguins' population is 19% higher today than it would have been without wildlife rehabilitation in the past 4 decades. More specifically, a king eider lived 16 years after being rehabilitated from the 1996 Exxon Valdez oil spill. Each successful rehabilitation is a chance for wildlife to contribute their unique genetic strengths to their species' long-term survival. One of the biggest takeaways for me from this Creature Conserve program is how willing people and organizations are to share information if you simply ask, even if you ask out of the blue. In my case, I asked International Bird Rescue a bunch of questions out of the blue, and through several emails, I learned a lot about the rehabilitation process and received a wealth of information and photos. Their kindness and the impact of the work that they do was so uplifting, and it inspired me to create a sculpture that I will present shortly. The International Bird Rescue, also known as Bird Rescue, has crisis response centers in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Anchorage, Alaska. Since 1971, Bird Rescue has responded to over 250 oil spills and other wildlife emergencies, caring for more than 160,000 birds. I just want to pause 1 second and say that number again. They've cared for more than 160,000 birds on 6 continents. The rehabilitation story of one particular bird opened my eyes to the dedication, knowledge, and professionalism involved in wildlife rehabilitation. At Bird Rescue, patients are not named Sully, Joe, Bob, etc. They're not anthropomorphized. In the name of science, their identities relay important information. The 22 in Brown Pelican 22-1039 stands for the year 2022. This bird was found on July 30th, 2022 in Malibu, California. It was transferred to Bird Rescue the same day. The 1039 means that this bird was the 1039th patient at Bird Rescue's Los Angeles facility as of late July 2022. That's truly astounding. This brown pelican was a female in her hatch year, so she was born in 2022. 95% of her body was contaminated with oil, including inside her pouch and her throat. She was emaciated, weighing 2,770 grams on intake. Before we talk about the harm that crude oil poses to birds, I want to first explain the basic anatomy of a feather. In the center, we have the quill or the rachis. As you can see, it goes up the center of the feather, and branching off the rachis are barbs. And then off the barbs are wispy barbules. They act as Velcro, and off the barbules are these little teeny hooks known as hamuli that you can barely see. They're little kind of spikes that are drawn off, little loops. And this physiology allows birds to regulate their temperature, to float, and to fly. From crude to unglued. So now that we have a basic understanding of feather structure, let's look at what contaminants like crude do to a feather. Like hair gel, crude oil clumps, pinches, and pulls these structures. Birds are rendered flightless, non-buoyant, unable to regulate temperature, and they're at risk of oil absorption and consumption. The electron microscope photo on the right shows a clean feather. Using water and dish soap, food can be removed from feathers. Birds can then preen and add natural oils back to their feathers, and this helps the feathers lay more orderly. This helps birds gain the ability to regulate their temperature, float, and fly again. After 34 days in rehabilitation, brown pelican 22-1039 had a successful recovery from crude contamination and was able to survive on her own back in the wild. She was released on September 2nd, 2022. The blue band allows scientists to report sightings of her in the wild so that we can learn about where she is and gather research. She now wears the blue band 9C1 on her leg. My sculpture is called Darkest Before Dawn. And for my Creature Conserve project, I work to design a piece that allows viewers to compare a feather degraded from crude oil before and after the cleaning process from a macro or zoomed perspective. What is a macro sculpture? So a macro sculpture is like macro photography, but in sculptural form. It has texture that conceals or reveals colors as your perspective shifts. Here's an example of a Eurasian jade that I made. It's 24 inches in diameter or 61 centimeters in diameter. And you can see on the left, it looks pretty bright and kind of exposed. And then on the right, it looks pretty dark and you miss a lot of the features that you see on the left and in the center. Note in this piece, there is no negative space. I had never incorporated negative space in any of my macro sculptures before this next piece that I'm about to share. So I don't like to admit it, but strictly artistically speaking, I found beauty in the darkness, the clumpiness, and the wiriness of the contaminated feathers. I wanted to use this visually captivating quality to draw viewers into the work in hopes that they would walk away more enlightened about conservation and wildlife. Incorporating negative space was a must, and it was a challenge by both my mentor, Dale Wheeler, and the work of art itself. On the left, you can see the early development of my work where I'm doing exercises to play with negative space. And I'm also investigating whether or not to try to incorporate multiple feathers stacked on top of each other or focus on a single feather to highlight the effects of crude oil. I ended up choosing to focus on a single feather. And after 42 thumbnail sketches, you see the picture in the center is the quick composition that just really stood out to me. And I chose to further develop this quick little sketch into a life-size rendering. So the life-size rendering is 24 inches in diameter with an 8-inch center that's a floating circle. The center appears clean while the outer donut is to look oiled and ragged. I wanted to use petroleum-based products like roofing tar and oil paint, along with sand from a once contaminated beach to depict the crude oil and the grit and the dirty portion of the feather. So I want to next walk you through the sculptural process. So the first step is gluing the blocks of wood together. I say that I like to first start off with using my biggest tools, and then as I'm finishing, I use the smallest tools that I own. These initial steps are really physical and are quite a workout. After the gluing up of the blocks and squaring up of the blocks, I used a CNC to cut the blocks into circles. The reason I use a CNC is, if I messed up and made my circle slightly irregular, it would definitely stand out. So this cuts perfect circles, and allows me to then shape them. So on the far right, we see a picture where I sketched in the rachis or the quill, and also just drew some rough lines of where my negative space was going to go. The most important aspect uh, is the quill, and that's the first thing that I sculpt and kind of excavate out of the piece. You see that on the left is I pretty much only sculpted down to the quill, and then I rounded and brought down the edges to give the feather some round shape. Then I used a jigsaw, a bandsaw, and a coping saw to cut the little negative space notches out of the wood. From there, I used a pencil to draw each barbule on the piece. This took several days, and I went through an entire pencil just drawing these lines. This is a critical step because the sculpting part is pretty surgical, and there's not much chance for reworking the piece when you start cutting into it. So this is once I sculpted the detail and the texture into the piece. I use a box cutter for this step. Each groove takes about 4 different cuts. It's extremely tedious, and then each groove has to be hand sanded individually. Um, it's a good thing that there are podcasts because that allows me to just really zone out and lose track of time, because this step just takes forever. Now, after I carve the piece, sand it, I seal it with a marine varnish, and then I apply an automotive primer, which you see on the left. After that, I gesso the work and begin adding layers of oil paint. As you can see, the right half of this feather is pretty warm. I ended up cooling it off with a lot of blues and purples and trying to add just a lot of depth to the piece. On the right, you can see the effect of the tar, the grit, the shell, the sand in with the oil paints. So here's a professional image of the finished work. Key to the sculpture's design is you are only rewarded with seeing the full extent of the positive change of the clean center when you approach the piece and in turn the conservation issues head on. Why did I choose a circle? There are several reasons. One is there are no straight lines found in nature. And also, it is a similar view to that of the circular view when you look at something underneath a microscope and take a deeper and closer look. Here are some different perspectives of the piece. They're slightly skewed, and as you can see, as you walk around the sculpture, which hangs on the wall, the piece changes. And like I mentioned earlier, the center is most visible when you view the piece head on. And as you walk around to the far left or the far right, you start to really lose the center. This serves as a metaphor for how we must approach the efforts of rehabilitation, how slanted views can blind us. And when we don't look at the facts and the information, we lose sight of what is happening, what is actually happening in front of us. We cannot ignore the importance and the impact of wildlife rehabilitation. We cannot ignore the fact that humans are both the problem and the solution. There is hope for positive change when we understand the success of wildlife rehabilitation, and we must realize that even at the macro level, We are all deeply connected. Here are a couple of close-ups. We have the kind of shining center, the beacon in the middle, which floats on its own and is hung on its own, kind of compared to the bogged down outer edges on the right. You can see some grit, some shell, the tar, how it blends in with the paint. One of my favorite features from the beach that I took the grit from, which was once contaminated, is the regrowth and in a lot of the sand, there were these baby shells, and on the rocks, lots of small oysters that were growing back. So seeing the regrowth was really special, and it was really special to take sand from this location and physically attach it to the piece. Location and dissemination. I hope to show the piece in places of moderate to high traffic. I would like to show the piece in both a fine art setting, such as a museum or gallery, and an environmental or educational setting, such as a national park or university. Gallery settings, the gallery setting is often in an urban location where access to the natural world is more challenging. There's an opportunity for heightened awareness for clashes between nature and industry here. An educational setting is focused on teaching and learning, and I hope that the work could provide a visual to aid with other information dissemination. I personally have had some amazing experiences sharing my macro sculptures with those who are visually impaired, and I hope to share the works with in places with other groups of people that have maybe visual or hearing or different impairments, and just seeing how they connect with the work and perceive the world around them. I find their perspectives deeply inspiring and impactful. And I'm excited and honored to share that the first stop for this piece will be part of the Reimagining Conservation from Many Viewpoints exhibition that runs from July 1st to about mid-November at the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson, Wyoming. I have a call to connection, which is a QR code, and I hope that this QR code is able to be placed next to the work wherever it is displayed. Viewers can scan this QR code and have a self-guided experience where they learn about wildlife rehabilitation from a page on my website. And I'm just going to pause briefly to allow everybody, if they have a phone nearby, to take their phone out and scan the QR code so that they can check out this page whenever they get a chance at some point later today. And on my website, on this page, I have information that talks about signs that an animal may need rehabilitation, resources for people to locate nearby rehabilitators. You can watch my sculptural process. You can learn more about the International Bird Rescue and a lot more. There's also a great visual with a YouTube video on there about what happens when birds are contaminated with oil, and the rehabilitation process as well. And then I will have continued progression on this piece and share some additional information as it develops on my social media, on Spencer Tinkham Art on Facebook and Instagram. So thank you guys so much for listening and following my project, and a special thanks to Dale and the Creature Conserve team for helping me to grow professionally and as an artist. And I also want to thank Bird Rescue for their tremendous work and for inspiring me and many others and making such a big impact on wildlife around us. So thank you.